But now let's go to the EU and see what they are saying about Ghana and why all of this is coming up and whether or not there is any truth in some of the allegations or information that have come up as far as they lead to the withdrawal of budgetary support of how much? $135 million to Ghana is concerned. I'll start on that note with you, Eric. How do you take that news that this is how the EU feels and it is the reason the money that is needed so badly to support the budget will not come? Already, we have done a year with donor support not coming in as much as had been expected for various reasons.
I mean, it's extremely unfortunate that we still find ourselves in a situation whereby our image and the perception about us as a country keeps being dented day in, day out by this particular government. Typical example is what happened in Brazil, and I'm not going to basically elaborate on that. But we find ourselves, especially when it comes to this NDC government and previous ones, always embroiled in one sort of scandal or the other when it comes to the way we actually deal with these international organizations. The government itself has alluded to the fact that the reason why we are facing the challenges that we are facing, especially when it comes to our budget management, is the fact that the donors funding, the support that is meant to come in, hasn't come. And now, basically, we're looking at the fact that simple measures in terms of how to sort of move ghost names from our public sector wage bill has not been able to happen. And like Kweku said earlier, some of these things actually are issues.
Why do you say it hasn't happened?
No, because
very many times there are publications, and Kweku has shown us here on this platform before, publications starting from as far back as the PNDC era, where consistently ghost names are exposed.
No, it's not enough to basically expose ghost names. Now, we're in 2014, going to 2015. There's absolutely no excuse. How come we do not have a robust, stringent system to make sure that that doesn't happen in the first place? And the only way you can actually give some kind of credence to this is the fact that there is some kind of political machinery involved in these things. You understand? And like I alluded to earlier, whereby you have party officials directly involved in the administration of some of these public institutions, you're definitely going to find these problems. Now, my point is that if you find yourself in a situation whereby we have
that point, I don't get it. Party officials who are engaged in public office.
What I'm saying is that
yes,
there's definitely some kind of complicity coming from government, and I can state that categorically because there's conflict of interest. Yeah. And if there are issues, right? There are issues with ghost names in the public sector, and this public sector is being managed by people. I mean, of course, everybody has
party machinery.
Yeah, everybody has some kind of political leanings. I'm not, saying that it's bad, but people who are actively involved in political machinery, right? You can go to the GDAs, you can go to the SADAs, you can go to all these places, whereby people are foot soldiers.
You're saying that the ghost names that I remember famously, Osafo or Kwabena. What was his name again? God bless his soul. Barredu Dems, expunged from the payroll. You're saying that party officials knew about them and kept them.
No,
is that what was going on?
No, that's not the point. Now, I don't really like this situation whereby we always try to equalize some of these things. Now, that's the reason why the good people of this country made a decision to vote for NDC, right? In the regard that they would do something much better than we did. Is that not the point? Now, after 6 years, if you keep finding ghost names, and now we have the benefits of technology to be able to, we're talking about 600,000 odd people. How is it so difficult to be able to track? Now, there's always this thing about there's a biometric data system and all that. But then the ghost names keeps finding themselves into the public sector wage bill. And the government itself has stated categorically, even though it has bandied all sorts of figures around as to the real impact on the public sector wage bill on the economy, right, has alluded to the fact that it's something that needs to be checked. Now, if we find ourselves in the situation whereby just because of some kind of ineptitude and some kind of complicity, making sure that party cohorts, foot soldiers, are actually placed in some of these institutions. And of course, it's actually in contradiction with the government's own policy on putting a freeze on the public sector employment. Is that not the case? So basically what I'm looking at is a case of leadership. The government cannot feign ignorance as to exactly what has happened in this particular case. And it has to come out and answer for it.
When you first read the report as presented by the Sunday Times that the UK government or the EU anti-fraud agency was probing a mammoth corruption scandal running into several millions of pounds in Ghana, being aid package from the EU to support the country's budget, which, you know, was being thrown to ghost workers. How did you take that?
Well, something I think the first point to make, and the first point that hits me every time in issues like this, is the one about the way forward for us, whether we continue with donor funding or whether we decolonize our economy or whether we decolonize ourselves. And it's a shame that 57 years after independence, we are still dependent. This highlights our dependency. Our budget cannot be balanced because we are still waiting for donor crumbs to be able to balance the books. That's the first point to make. We have a stark choice to make. We pursue, we decolonize our economy, we reduce our dependency. So the dependency issue hits me very hard. Going on from there, if you are a donor and continuously you keep reading stories about money being siphoned from SADA, money being siphoned from JIDA, money being siphoned from the NSS, etc., what will you do? So let's look at it, how the shame that it brings to the nation, that now we are being scrutinized by donors who are giving us some crumbs to balance our books. It just gives an impression of a country that's not able to manage its affairs. And on top of that, we give you money, you mismanage it.
They are not giving you crumbs. So your budget is what percentage supported by...
That against the wealth of this nation is nothing.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to manage that wealth, frankly, you're not fit to be in government. And that's the situation facing this country. Vast wealth, vast poverty. We're not able to bridge that gap. And that's why we're relying on what I'm calling crumbs. But this government who holds the record in tarnishing the image of public institutions. You list them. You list them. Since they've been in government, how many public institutions, the image of SADA, the image of JIDA, the image of SHRAG, the image of the NSS, even the National Black Stars, the image has been tarnished under this government. And if you're a donor and you're sitting aside and you're seeing this image being tarnished, all these public institutions involved in some way in corruption, will you not pause to decide that I'm going to review whether I continue to give you the money, whether I continue to give you anything at all? And that's when I read such a story, it's the shame it brings as a nation to continue on this dependency. It's the shame it brings to continue on this path of rampant corruption.
Look beyond the shame and look at also the impact it has on the people you are most concerned about, the poor, because this money is supposed to come to support them.
Well, exactly it. But we know that part of what is happening is we are putting money aside, for example. We put 200 million aside to help the North, and we siphon it through the back door with the people that we are appointing. That's undermining the poor. That's undermining the people of the North. You are making yourself an enemy of the people of the North. So why should I, who should continue to give you money, why should I continue to give you money? Because the money that you yourself are saying you're going to uplift people in particular areas, you're siphoning. You put money aside for the youth, you siphon it. Money aside for the North, you siphon it. Money for, in the NSS, you're siphoning it. You're wasting money at SHRAG to pay unnecessary hotel bills. And people see these things. The world is a global market. I mean, the donors are also seeing these things. They can see, and why should they continue? At some point, they are tightening their belts, and we're squandering. They're tightening our belts, and we're siphoning. They're tightening their belts, They are imposing hardship on their own people so that they can give donor funding. And what are we doing with the donor funding? Are we even changing our structural situation? That's why the future for this country, we have a stark choice. Structural adjustment, SAP, represented by NDC and MPP.
Okay, so you come
or
back.
decolonization represented by...
You'll come back to that. Like what we say, you know, jovially, I mean, we make fun with, in school, we say it's about the agama lizard. So you just come back to it. Therefore, what is agama lizard? He will always come back to that and point to the CPP as the way forward. Now, when you hear me and Eric refer to the government on the issue of payroll fraud, we understand this constitutes about 1% of our GDP. We have about 20% of the workforce that, you know, come under ghost workers. Is that the attitude, how to look at the issue of ghost workers?
Like many of the problems that public institutions are afflicted with, the continuous labeling politically of the problems prevent us from looking at them the way they ought to be looked at. If you have been reading the newspapers over the years, year in, year out, the newspapers publish incidents of payroll fraud. And if you look at normally the persons involved, they are not politicians. They are not the politicians. Some are technocrats, and some are just leaders at various levels of leadership in the public.
A similar process is going on under the education service.
Yes.
And we're told about how some headmasters will connive to ensure that some persons who are gone or who are dead are replaced by some other people.
Or even, I mean, they are not the play, but still, the money is. So it borders on personal integrity of those or individuals who manage certain public institutions. And we should look at it from that angle. All governments have taken steps to deal with the issue of payroll fraud. And currently, the most popular approach, which was started some time ago and being continued, has to do with the use of the biometric system. Even so, I mean, you still continue to have these problems, I mean, emerging. That tells us that those engaged in such practices continue to have ways and means of, outwitting the system. So that is where our focus should be. I do not think that it is an NPP phenomenon. I do not think that it is an NDC phenomenon or even a CPP phenomenon. It is a question of personal integrity of whoever is involved in it, and that is how I think we should look at it, I mean, in order that we can effectively deal with it. It can be very painful that people will tax their citizens, governments will tax their citizens, and rather than use the money to improve the living conditions of their people, they will give that money to us so that we can improve our living conditions, only for them to hear that this is how the money is being used. So clearly, I do not think that we should have problems with the EU. We should have problems with our own systems. We should have problems with those who operate the machinery that generate those particular problems. And the best way to do it is not to politicize it. The moment we politicize it, then it means that we are not committed to the proper dealing of the issues. And that's how I want us to look at it.
Politicized. That is the very nature of our
political leadership. Yeah.
And, you know, to keep making arguments that this issue should not be politicized, that should not be politicized, what should we politicize? Stealing state funds is politics.
When ghost names are found in the education service, how do you politicize that?
It's a political issue that says that one party is incapable of ruling this country. That's politics.
I get your point.
It's
now.
A political issue.
Okay, now, Kweku, we are told that this year alone about $9 million have been withheld because of some of these issues, and now we're going to lose as much as 135.
Yeah, it should be a wake-up call. But we should ask ourselves, why have we been incapable of curing this particular mischief? That is political, yes. But to politicize it, I disagree. And the politicization amounts to trying to allocate, segmenting and allocating blame to particular governments. Then all governments are to be blamed, put it that way. All parties that have had a chance to rule this country are to be blamed, in the sense that perhaps they have not been able to cure the mischief by putting in place effective systems to cure that mischief, but not that they deliberately inflated the wage bill by planting goals there and taking the monies for themselves. No government does that. You may have individual members of government who are engaged in such criminal activities, and if are exposed, must be dealt with. But generally, you go check. I have all some of the records here. I can't say all.
So what you just said, what do we say to what the minority said in Parliament in blocking the JIDA bill? We are getting a bill for JIDA, and some are suggesting this is only a way for government to put some money aside for elections.
Oh, come on. Please, some of us have gone beyond that. Putting in place an enabling legislation for JIDA and undertaking a specific exercise to retrieve money are not mutually exclusive. They can be done concurrently if you have the commitment that indeed these monies that we've all agreed were not properly disbursed or were illegally allocated or to be retrieved. Nobody is going to convince me that we should go on an exercise of retrieving the monies or sanctioning the corporates through criminal prosecution before we come to put in place an enabling legislation. Then let's suspend JIDA entirely, scrap it. How long is it going to take to do criminal prosecution? Do you know? Can you guess? You can never. It could take years because of the kind of defense the defendants may put up. Meanwhile, we cannot wait for JIDA to stand still. So it's a matter of strategic thinking. The two can be done at the same time, but you need commitment. Commitment that, look, we are putting in place this enabling legislation. It isn't as if it was the absence of law that brought the JIDA nonsense or rot. Let's be honest, because there were other existing legal regimes that if had been adhered to. But we all agree that since we are institutionalizing the JIDA thing, initially it was as if it would be a stopgap thing. But since we are institutionalizing it, then we need specific enabling legislation for it. I took that argument. To be honest, I was surprised when I heard it because it was not mutually exclusive.
Okay, move on your...
Look, having gone through all the documentations, including the Hansard, all sides, under Rawlings as well as under Kufuor and under Mills, it was clear that there's always collaboration between personnel at the Controller and Accountant Generals, Auditor Generals, the MDAs, and the MMDAs. Many efforts, and I have them here, have been made to delete those names. Sometimes 20,000, 10,000, 15,000, 13,000, and all these things, we celebrated them. Some of those names reappeared. So it came to the point that, look, perhaps we need the biometric registration thing, an electronic approach, because there are experiences elsewhere where some countries have been able to solve that thing using electronic means. I'm told it's underway here, but it doesn't appear as if we are succeeding too well, because there's still that human element, where in the 2002 Hansard, that some of the technical equipment were sabotaged. The human beings who were in charge of handling the machines decided to break the machines. It's like the airport thing, the cocaine matter. They sabotaged the machine.
Disable it.
They disabled it. You see, so to be honest, that is why I said I disagree if the suggestion is made that it is the political parties who win elections and form governments that deliberately pursue this kind of rot. That I disagree. If that suggestion is made, then I see that as politicization. But if you say that it must take political leadership in order to put in place effective governance systems to cure that mischief, and if there's a deficit, you blame that particular political leadership, you have a point.
Okay.
So that's the extension we should draw. I don't think it's difficult for people like us here to see that extension. And I can see my brother nodding. So we are in agreement.
All right. We'll take a break at this point. We'll be back. And Pastor Pramkwa Martin, SK, says, reduce fuel prices drastically, else what happened to NPP will happen to NDC. Cycle analysis. I'm sure you know exactly what he's referring to. In the heat of the elections, something happened. They say if the NDC doesn't do that, you can wait 2016. So we are taking a break at this point. We will be right back.